I always believed secrets had a way of showing themselves, but that day, the secret wasn't the shock. The shock was how everyone looked at me when they realized I had known the truth long before any of them. You see, life has a way of placing tests in front of us, tests that measure not our wealth, but our character. When I found out that there was a $500,000 trust fund in my name, everyone assumed I would react with greed, excitement, or tears of joy. They expected me to be overwhelmed. They expected me to change, but I want you to stay with me until the end, because what I said in that room left every single person silent. It wasn't the money that mattered, it was the history, the promise, and the truth that came with it. And if you miss even a moment, you'll miss the lesson that changed all of our lives. When I was younger, my life was not filled with luxury or comfort. I worked with my hands, I prayed with my heart, and I believed that if I kept my dignity, I would never be poor in spirit. So as the years went by, I learned to cherish simple joys, warm tea, sunrise light through lace curtains, the laughter of family, even when the cupboards were nearly bare. One afternoon, I was invited to a very serious family meeting. Everyone sat stiff, whispers floating like dust in sunlight. I noticed the nervous glances, the tapping fingers, the slight tremor in voices. Something important was waiting to be said. Then, in a tone heavy with importance, the lawyer cleared his throat and announced the existence of a trust. A trust worth $500,000. My name was written on it. My future, as they believed, was suddenly transformed. But I did not gasp. I did not faint. I did not reach for the air or press my hand to my chest like they imagined I would. I only folded my hands in my lap and looked at each face in the room with quiet understanding, because I had known. I had known about that money for many years. I knew who set it aside. I knew why, and I knew the meaning behind it far outweighed the numbers on paper. So when they asked why I wasn't surprised, why I wasn't overcome with excitement, I simply said, money can build houses, but only love builds homes. Money can fill purses, but it cannot fill hearts. I have lived without wealth, and yet I have not been poor. If this money is to come to me, then it must carry purpose, not greed. The room went still. The noise of expectation dissolved. They looked at me not as someone receiving wealth, but as someone who had already possessed something priceless. That was the moment they understood. The trust fund was not the treasure. My peace was. There are things in this life that cannot be bought, no matter how large the fortune may be, and dignity is the finest among them. I learned the value of dignity long before I ever heard the words spoken in a classroom or a church pew. It was taught to me by calloused hands, quiet sacrifices, and the soft strength of those who endured hardships without ever letting those hardships define who they were. I remember watching my mother stretch a single loaf of bread to feed more mouths than it was meant for, yet she never let us see fear in her eyes. She would lace her apron, hum softly, and move about the kitchen as if we were feasting on banquets. She never allowed poverty to diminish her grace. That is where I first understood that dignity is not about what you have, but how you hold yourself when the world expects you to fall apart. People think dignity is pride, but no. Pride demands recognition. Dignity asks for nothing. It is a quiet, steady way of standing in one's truth without needing applause. When the news of that trust fund came to light, many believed that I had spent my life waiting for such a moment, that perhaps I had felt lacking without money, that I had been living in the shadows of scarcity. But they did not know the wealth I carried, wealth in the form of patience, in the form of resilience, in the form of knowing that who I am does not depend on what is handed to me or withheld. Some folk go their entire lives chasing approval, chasing status, chasing the illusion that money can mend the fractures inside them. Yet those fractures come not from being poor, but from believing that worth is something external. When you know your worth, the world cannot make you feel small. I have stood in rooms where people possessed fortunes yet trembled inside, constantly afraid someone might uncover how hollow they felt. I have also stood beside women who had nothing but their worn shoes and their will to keep going, and they possessed more nobility in a single sigh than others held in their entire estates. Dignity is not loud. It does not seek to impress. It is the way you speak to others even when your day has been heavy. It is the way you refuse to see yourself as less than anyone else, no matter how much gold glitters before you. When that lawyer looked at me, waiting for surprise, waiting for hunger, waiting for the kind of reaction that many associate with sudden wealth, what I felt instead was memory. Memory of winters where we wrapped ourselves in blankets because wood was scarce. Memory of walking miles to work because there was no fare for the bus. Memory of neighbors sharing what little they had without shame or hesitation. In those days, we did not have dollars to give, we had kindness. And kindness held more weight than any coin ever could. I remember sewing clothes by lamplight, fingers pricked and eyes tired, yet I never thought of myself as poor. I thought of myself as capable. I thought of myself as someone who could create, who could mend, who could bring something into this world with her own hands. That is dignity too, the refusal to see yourself as a victim of circumstance. People who are raised to believe they are lacking often carry hunger for the rest of their lives, even when the table becomes full. That hunger shows itself in greed, in jealousy, in always needing more. But when you are raised to believe you are enough, enough in your essence, enough in your effort, enough in your breath, then wealth cannot inflate you and poverty cannot diminish you. There is a freedom in that kind of identity, a freedom that cannot be taken or given, only lived. When I saw that $500,000 written on paper, it did not stir in me a sense of elevation. I did not feel as though my life was suddenly transformed, because true transformation had happened long ago, in the hardship, in the struggle, in the quiet victories no one had witnessed but me. If money comes to me, let it not change who I am. Let it not take from me the gentleness that poverty taught, the humility that work taught, the gratitude that survival taught. I have seen those who receive wealth quickly become unrecognizable to themselves. They trade in their laughter for arrogance, their generosity for suspicion, their simplicity for restless appetite. They do not notice the shift at first. It arrives slowly, like fog creeping along the ground, until one day they look around and see strangers at their table, strangers in their mirror. That is what comes when dignity is not your foundation. There is a steadiness that comes when you have lived without leaning on wealth as your identity. You learn to see money as a tool, not a treasure. You learn that your voice remains your own, whether you are sitting in a small kitchen or a grand dining hall. You learn that your spirit cannot be measured in currency. I have walked through seasons where I owned very little, yet I never bowed my head in shame. I never felt unworthy. I never needed to prove myself to anyone. Dignity is when you can meet another person's stare with calm eyes, knowing that you do not rise above them, and they do not rise above you. You are equal in humanity, regardless of fortune. It is easy to lose ourselves when given something we did not expect. But I had already learned that the greatest wealth is understanding oneself. So when they waited for my reaction, they were expecting the response of someone who believed money could change her life. Instead, they saw the response of someone whose life had already been shaped by far deeper forces. The steadiness of my hands, the quiet of my voice, the softness of my breath, all of it came from years of knowing that dignity is the one inheritance I never had to wait for, the one treasure that cannot be stolen, diminished, or undone, the one certainty that remains even when the world shifts like wind around me, when people hear the word money. They often imagine comfort, power, and admiration following close behind. They believe that possessing large amounts of wealth is enough to provide meaning and fulfillment. But possessions without purpose are like a house without a foundation, impressive at first glance, yet hollow and fragile beneath. I have lived long enough to see how wealth can change people, not because money holds power on its own, but because they give power to the idea of possessing it. If you chase money only for the sake of owning it, it will devour you from within. Money is not a cure for emptiness. It is only a tool. It is the hand behind the tool that decides whether something is built or destroyed. I have watched families torn apart because they believed inheritance was a prize to be claimed rather than a responsibility to be carried. I have seen siblings who once shared bread and laughter stand on opposite sides of courtrooms, voices filled with bitterness, hearts filled with anger, all because they forgot that money is meant to serve life, not define it. When I learned about that trust fund, I knew immediately that the number written did not matter. What mattered was what that money represented. It was set aside with intention, with meaning, with a story behind it. To use it thoughtlessly would have been an insult to the hands that earned it, the sacrifices that formed it, the journey that led to its existence. You see, whenever money comes from a place of love, it must be handled with honor. And whenever money comes without love, it must be handled with caution. Many people do not understand this. They believe that receiving money is an opportunity to finally feel important. But importance does not come from possessions. A room full of gold cannot give you peace at night. A drawer full of jewels cannot heal a bitter heart. Purpose is what gives life depth. Without purpose, even wealth becomes a burden. I have known people who spent their entire lives trying to acquire more. The moment they reached one goal, they set another. They were always chasing, always grasping, never satisfied. They would buy new furniture and yet not feel at home. They would wear expensive clothing and yet feel unseen. They would host grand gatherings and yet feel profoundly alone in a room full of guests. It was not that their lives lacked comfort. It was that their hearts lacked purpose, and I have known others who had little but lived fully. They shared meals that were humble, yet filled with joy. They planted gardens not to show off, but to nurture life. They worked hard, not for applause, but because they took pride in creating something meaningful. Their joy did not depend on possessions. It flowed from purpose. Purpose turns even a single coin into abundance. Possession without purpose turns even a fortune into dust. When I heard those numbers announced in that quiet room, I did not see wealth. I saw responsibility. I saw a crossroads, a decision on how that money would shape the future, not just for me, but for those who would come after. I knew that if I treated it carelessly, it would become a source of conflict, envy, and regret. But if I treated it with intention, it could become a blessing that extended beyond my own lifetime. So I asked myself the same question I have asked at every turning point in my life. What is the meaning behind this? Not, what can I gain? Not, what do others expect me to do? But what is the purpose hiding in this moment? When you approach life through purpose, every decision becomes clearer. You stop worrying about how others perceive you. You stop comparing your journey to anyone else's. You stop trying to impress, to compete, to grasp. Possession invites comparison. Purpose invites peace. I have lived in rooms where the walls were cracked and the floors creaked, yet laughter echoed warmly. I have also visited homes that were large and polished, yet heavy with silence. Comfort does not come from the size of the space, but from the intention placed within it. Money can fill a room with furniture. Purpose fills it with life. There were times in my past when I did not know how the next day would unfold, how the bills would be paid, or how I would stretch what little I had to care for those depending on me. In those moments, it was purpose that lifted me from despair. The purpose to nurture, to protect, to continue. I never worked for money alone. I worked for what that money made possible, for warmth in the winter, for food on the table, for shoes on the feet of those I loved, for dignity. That is why the trust fund did not startle me. Money only matters when you already know who you are. When someone does not know who they are, wealth becomes a mask. When someone knows their worth, wealth becomes simply a tool, and tools are only as valuable as the hands that guide them. If money comes into your life, never ask, how much is it? Ask, what is it for? If wealth enters your household, do not treat it as a throne. Treat it as a seed, tend to it, care for it, plant it where it can grow into something meaningful, let it build futures. Let it heal wounds, let it strengthen what already exists, let it continue a story that began before you were here. Let it serve life, not overshadow it. Let it move through your hands without taking your soul with it. There are gifts that outlast time, gifts that cannot be locked in boxes or counted on paper. The legacy of love is one such gift. It moves quietly from heart to heart, generation to generation, shaping lives long after the hands that gave it have turned to dust. When I speak of love, I do not mean the grand and loud kind that demands to be recognized. I mean the steady kind, the kind that works without applause, that holds families together through storms and seasons, that teaches us who we are even when we do not understand ourselves. That trust fund, the one everyone assumed was meant to surprise me into joy or overwhelm me with fortune, was not created from wealth alone. It was created from love. It carried years of sacrifice, effort, and dreams. It was not simply money. It was a memory of devotion. It was a continuation of a promise. It was a way of saying, I cared so deeply that I prepared for your future, even when you could not see it coming. Many people receive gifts and focus on the material result, missing entirely the sentiment that brought the gift into existence. They see the value of the object, not the value of the intention, but love is rarely loud. It works in silence. A parent leaving food for a child before leaving for work, hoping they will eat well. A grandparent stitching patches into jackets so little shoulders stay warm. A friend showing up when the world feels heavy, without needing to be asked. These are the fragments of love that build lives far stronger than wealth alone. And when love builds a legacy, it does not vanish when the giver is gone. It leaves fingerprints on every day that follows. My life has been shaped by such fingerprints. I remember the stories told by the elders in my family. They spoke not of riches, not of mansions or jewels, but of the way we looked after one another. They told stories of neighbors who shared firewood in harsh winters, of families who pooled coins to help bury the dead with dignity, of hands that worked together in harvest seasons because no one should be left to labor alone. There were no contracts, no receipts, no debt owed. There was simply love. And love became inheritance. When the trust fund was revealed, the lawyer spoke about numbers. The others in the room thought of what those numbers could buy. But I thought of the heart behind the hands that earned that money. I thought about the nights of exhaustion, the quiet hopes, the whispered prayers. I thought of the person who believed that I deserved to be cared for, even in a future they would not live to see. That is love stretching itself across time. You see, love is not only expressed in affection or words. It is expressed in foresight, in preparing something meaningful for someone you may not even get to watch enjoy it. And when love is passed down correctly, it does not create entitlement. It creates gratitude. I have seen wealth given without love, and it leaves nothing but greed. It makes people believe that the world owes them something. It hardens them. But wealth given with love carries humility. It reminds the receiver of where they come from and who they belong to. When I accepted that money, I accepted not a fortune, but a responsibility to continue the love that created it. A legacy should not end with the one who inherits it. A legacy should move forward, shaping future hands. I have seen families lose their sense of unity because they forgot this. They remember the wealth but forget the love. They claim the property but forget the sacrifices. They hold the assets but let go of the values, and that is when the legacy dies. A legacy of love is preserved through action. It is preserved when someone chooses to nurture instead of neglect, to uplift instead of diminish, to share instead of hoard. I remember sitting at the table after the news was given to me. There was silence, some confusion, some disbelief, and I looked at them all and said nothing at first, because I needed them to see that the money had not changed me. I was the same woman who had shared my bread, who had opened my doors, who had comforted them when their hearts were broken. Wealth could not amplify who I was, because I was already whole. Love had made me whole. Love teaches you how to use what you have for good. Even when what you have is very little, even when what you have is just a kind word spoken at the right time. I remember days when a single act of love was the difference between despair and another sunrise. A warm meal brought to a grieving family, a letter sent to someone in the hospital, a blanket tucked around a crying child. These seem small, yet they are the bricks that build the foundation of a life that can withstand anything. Money can buy blankets, yes, but money cannot teach the hands to place the blanket with tenderness. That is love, and when love is passed down as inheritance, it cannot be lost. It cannot be wasted. It only grows. So, when I speak of legacy, I do not speak of the trust fund itself. I speak of the love that created it. I speak of the history that shaped it. I speak of the sacrifices that made it possible. And I speak of the duty to ensure that love does not end with me. There is a quiet kind of wealth that lives inside a person, a fullness that is not dependent on circumstances, praise, or possessions. Inner fulfillment is that wealth. It is the understanding that peace does not come from what you have, but from who you are and how you choose to live. I have known many people who spent their entire lives searching for something outside themselves to fill the emptiness they felt within. They chased attention, admiration, material rewards, even relationships, believing that if they could just gather enough of these things, the ache inside would stop. But emptiness cannot be filled with noise. It can only be filled with truth. When the trust fund was revealed and everyone around me looked to see how I would react, the silence that followed was not because I was shocked, but because I was steady. I did not feel the sudden lifting of a burden, nor the thrill of receiving something grand. I did not feel richer than I did the day before. I felt exactly the same. That is because I was already full. Not full of luxury, not full of outward success, but full of a peace that had taken years to grow. Peace built through resilience, peace built through gratitude, peace built through knowing that the value of my life was never something that could be altered by a number on a page. I have learned that inner fulfillment begins when you stop measuring yourself by the world's standards. There was a time when I, like many others, believed that happiness would come one day when life finally became easier. I thought perhaps when the bills were lighter, or when the house felt more comfortable, or when the days didn't require so much effort, peace would simply arrive like a letter in the mail. But peace does not arrive. Peace is cultivated. It is grown one decision at a time, when you choose to be grateful for the moments you have instead of longing for the ones you don't. When you choose to speak kindly even when your heart feels tired. When you choose to focus on what remains rather than what has been lost. These are seeds planted in the soul, and over years they grow into something strong and steady, something money cannot buy. I have walked through sorrow. I have known loneliness that pressed into my bones. I have stood in kitchens late at night, leaning against the counter, wondering how I would face the next day. But every time I rose again, every time I did what needed to be done with grace rather than bitterness, something in me grew. Strength that did not shout, faith that did not waver, compassion that did not dissolve even when life felt unfair. These are the ingredients of fulfillment. They shape a soul into a sanctuary. So when others looked at me expecting excitement, or relief, or unraveling joy at the thought of $500,000 falling into my hands, what they did not understand was that I had already built my life upon something more secure than wealth. Wealth can vanish, peace cannot. The world teaches people to chase more. More money, more things, more recognition, more status. But chasing never ends. There is always someone with more. There is always something new to want. There is always another mountain waiting after the one you've climbed. Fulfillment comes when you stop chasing and start being. being present in your own life, being grateful for the ordinary moments, being compassionate toward yourself and others, being aware that joy is not hidden in some distant future. It is available in the quiet now. I have seen joy in the glow of morning sunlight on a kitchen table. I have seen joy in the sound of laughter shared between loved ones. I have seen joy in a warm cup held by cold hands after a long day of work. These are simple things, but they are not small things. They are the spine of a meaningful life. Money can expand the world around you, yes. It can bring comfort. It can ease burdens. It can open doors, but it cannot tell you how to walk through those doors. It cannot teach you how to be content once you arrive. It cannot create joy where there is none. Joy is an inside job. Fulfillment is an inside treasure, and when you possess it, no one can take it from you. I have seen people with great fortunes who do not sleep soundly. Their minds race, their hearts worry, their souls ache. And I have seen people with barely enough to get by who sing while they cook, who laugh without hesitation, who sleep deeply and peacefully. Wealth cannot create rest. Fulfillment creates rest. So, in that moment, when eyes watched me closely, expecting me to change, to glow with new importance, to suddenly see my life as something bigger than before, I remained as I had always been. Because my life was already meaningful before the trust fund existed. Meaningful because of love given. Meaningful because of work done with pride. Meaningful because of relationships nurtured with patience and tenderness. A meaningful life does not begin when fortune arrives. It is already present in the way you greet each day and the way you treat each person you meet. Fulfillment comes from living in alignment with your values, even when no one is watching. It comes from knowing that you have been honest, kind, patient, and resilient. It comes from carrying a calmness inside that does not break when the world shifts around you. So the trust fund did not add to me. It simply became something I could choose to use with purpose, but it did not define me. I was already defined. I was already whole. And wholeness is the greatest wealth any person can ever hold within themselves.